Chapter 10. It was career day during the second half of my school year in the 12th grade. I was sitting in the school library reading about different skills and occupations that I could get a further education in after I graduated from high school. I was reading about being either an engineer, architect, accountant, or statistician. I had a good aptitude and a keen intellect in mathematics. After I had read about the different occupations, I stopped and gave thought to what I could be, occupation-wise, in my adult life. I asked myself the question, what do I honestly want to be and do? What instantaneously came to my mind was being a drunkard. It was without humor that I thought this. Being a drunkard in my later years would suit me just fine. I was already a drunkard in the here and now for at least a couple nights of the week. I continued being a guzzler of mostly beer, but also whiskey too. I blacked out and passed out a lot. I am so thankful for the two guy friends, Keith and George, I had. They were good men. And being around guys who didn't seek to manipulate, scam, or do me harm meant that I was a most fortunate guy to have made their acquaintance, let alone their friendship. With the weekly beatings, my life would have been beyond horrific in the worst possible way without their friendship. The emptiness, pain, and torment in my life and person might have pushed me over the edge into a withdrawal and isolation so deep that I might never have been able to come back out of it into the light. The greatest evil that my father perpetuated was that he stole my youngest brother's life without ever touching him physically. Like I said lie, it says evil. The greatest evil that my father perpetuated was that he stole my youngest brother's life without ever touching him physically. Jack was 6 years younger than me. The sound of the physical, verbal, and emotional violence emanating from my father in the household had to have been terrifying to Jack from his earliest age of consciousness. I think part of the evil from a perpetrator's perspective is of shock and awe. Coming into this world and trying to learn to be a part of it at an early age would be daunting enough at the very least in my father's household. Whatever his inner experiences were, they certainly could not have been anything that any young child would want to have to be a part of his life growing up. The screaming and cries of fright and terror at my age of 8 and 9. Jack would have been 2 or 3 at the time, were when my father began hitting me with the open-handed slap to the side of the face and head. I would come into the kitchen or dining room to eat, and my father would be there waiting for me. As I would come into our dining area, he would be standing there before me, or he would wait until I sat down at the table. He would accuse me of not doing some household chore. He would start cursing me. "Goddamn kid. Jesus crackers. You little snot-nosed kid." Working himself into a fury, he would then move towards me to hit me, knocking me out of my chair, or I would fall to the floor even before he hit me. He would bend over, he would begin slapping me, furious at me and cursing me. My mother would run over to the two of us, screaming at my father, "Don't mark his face, don't mark his face, he has to go to school tomorrow." At that age, 8 or 9, it was always the same behavior from my father, me, and my mother. I do not know what was occurring inside Jack's mind at age 2 or 3, but how could he not go into an emotional and mental shock at being forced to witness such incidents and behaviors most every day? At about the age of 3, Jack would go over to the wall in the dining room. He would sit down on the floor with his back to the wall. He would begin to rock himself back and forth up against the wall with the rear part of his body, both his back and head, hitting up against the wall. He would do this during various parts of the day, but almost always after dinner. The length of time he behaved in such a way was at the very least more than several months. My mother and brothers and I all thought Jack's behavior of going to the dining room wall and rocking back and forth, sometimes hitting the back of his head against the wall, was funny and endearing. Each of us would laugh aloud, not at him, but at his behavior. I watched Jack, and what he was doing, he seemed to be deriving a comfort. I thought to myself that maybe this was something that I wanted to try and do for myself. I thought ironically that I could use some ease of comfort for myself in this household. When I practiced it, it was not a pleasurable feeling, yet alone a up against the wall. The surface of the wall was not pliable. It was a hardened plaster. Performing this repetition for comfort or exercise was not something that I wanted to hold on to. One evening, my mother and I were in the dining room with Jack while he was doing this. My mother stopped what she was doing. She paused for a few moments, standing. Then she immediately walked right over to where Jack was sitting and, without a word, scooped him up in her arms. She took him out of the dining room into the living room and gently set him down on the couch. I followed her. She stepped back, watching Jack. He began rocking back and forth as he had out in the dining room. The noticeable difference was that he was no longer hitting the back of his head against anything other than the air of the room. The sofa cushioned Jack's back, so there wasn't even an issue of Jack harming his back. From that time forwards, Jack used the sofa or the living room chair, which was also cushioned, to practice his daily routine. He did it for at least the next year. Then he abruptly stopped altogether. My father waited until Jack was 4 or 5, and then he began to act out with my mother regarding Jack. He was never physically touched, nor was my father's hatred, obscenity, or profanity directed towards him. Yet of us 4 brothers, he was the one who experienced emotional, mental, and physical trauma in the worst possible way. His childhood and adult life were stolen from him by my father. Part of my father's power and dominance was to muffle and deaden the voices of the living witnesses. I asked Jack in 2017 if he had ever had a friend or a verbal conversation with anyone in his adult life. He said no. Only the psychiatric medications. Only with psychiatric medication since 2005 has he been able to speak a few words at a time. Throughout the day, I seek an invisible light in my imagination to see the inner beauty of light and spirit within my younger brother that I know is there. I believe his triumph in life is the same as mine, being a good person in spite of his life experience. His rejection of my father's example of living life and of my father's own evolution of predatory hate and evil stands tall as a man. He shares a presence of a higher good, outwardly and inwardly. I have enormous respect for him. I graduated from high school. My parents gave me a large suitcase as a graduation present. I found a job as a filing clerk in downtown Pittsburgh. I met a guy through work who wanted a roommate. I moved out of my household to across town. I lived there for a couple of months. My mother wanted and asked me to move back into the household. She said that things would be different and better with my father. I wanted to go to college and earn a degree. If I moved back in with my mother and father, I would have the money saved from not paying rent to pay for the winter semester beginning in January. What was I thinking? How could I have been so naive and lacking the foreknowledge of what would happen if I moved back into that place? Incredibly, I was that naive. I can't explain it. I moved back into the family home. It was dinner time. I had purchased an inexpensive car. I was sitting next to my father at the dinner table in the kitchen. He said to me, "I want the keys to that car that is sitting out front." I heard the undercurrent of suppressed rage in his voice. I leaped out of my chair and bolted for the back door. My father picked up a chair and threw it over and across the kitchen table at my head. It missed. I made it through the door. I didn't look back. I ran through the backyard of a neighbor and came out into an adjacent street. I was in my bare feet with only the clothes on my back. It had just rained. The concrete was wet and cold. I walked several blocks to Keith's house. I told him that what happened. He saw the shape I was. He invited me into his home. An hour later, my mother appeared at his front door. She had a large paper bag with my shoes and a change of clothing in there. She got Keith's phone number and said she would call when my father was at work, so I could come back and pick up the rest of my stuff along with my car. A couple of days later, I found a small apartment near the University of Pittsburgh. Keith was a lifesaver for me. Without his support, help, and friendship, I would have been dragged down to a much lower depth of hardship. It was against it was a it was August of 1966. The United States government drafted 40 to 50,000 guys to be in the military that month. I was 18. I volunteered to be drafted, and away I went that month. My present day. I have been a detective whose ambition has been trying to solve the mystery of not biological life but spiritual life, uncovering higher inner truths of a miracle of inner creation and being that existed in me as a young child. I have found that it is still there within me as an adult. I can experience it if only I can open a portal to inner light, warmth, and spirit. As an explorer, I have had to discover that the part of my past that was terror and shame wasn't really who I was. What happened to me didn't and doesn't make me into being who I really am. An intuition derived from higher inner truths has acted as a guide to help me search to find out what and who I really am. My faith is of inner light, of warmth, and of an aspiration and striving towards a well-being of spirit. To be true to my faith, to persevere by overcoming opposition, discouragement, and difficulty, to become aware of inner feeling and being an unknown, a living soul that is sacred and unique to me. To have a dream, a noble ideal upwards to which to aspire and strive, not to betray, diminish what is sacred within me. To take a risk, to carry a message of goodwill and good cheer to others, to try to make of my life a spiritual adventure by seeking to communicate an inner life that is within me, to escape from what I thought I was by trying to live up to my expectation of what it means to be me. It has been a lengthy journey to lessen and to negate the attempted evil that was done to me by my biological father. With a change of my perspective and with a passing of time, a healing has occurred within me. I try to brighten the colors of my day with inspiration and imagination. I try to be uplifting in spirit and in being to sustain inner life. To be to be a light with a passion. What I have that can be true inside myself is my word. To break free from my memories, to no longer be trapped within their spell and dominance, to remember the miracle of creation and of being I experienced as a child, waking up with a passion and an enthusiasm at being alive. I remember that my cornerstone is the foundation of my whole being. It is built upon the miracle of feeling and of inner creation and being that is within me. To make spiritual choices and decisions, to try to follow along a path of light and spiritual sanity, to reject spiritual insanity and the absence of light, choosing friendship and acquaintanceship over loneliness, choosing a beginning of an inspiration of a faith that I can practice, to take a risk, to try and acquire inner courage by sharing vulnerability and sensitivity as an inspiration and inner strength, to remember that my sacred childhood is the cornerstone of my identity, of what and who I am. In my adult life, I have had to be a detective uncovering false truths, such as I am a being of shame, defeat, and humiliation, along with the spiritual insanity of actually believing that the very best thing that I could do with my life on this planet was to kill it. To me, spiritual sanity is the attempted inner creation of light, spirit, and inner being. To brighten the colors of my imagination with inner light and to visualize inner beauty within another, to spark a light within, to envision another's inner plight, an attempt at their own inner creation of innermost being and light. I felt my life as a flickering, dwindling light, an awakening of golden yellow sunbeams of starlight to brighten my night into day, a twilight blue to illuminate heaven's innermost depths, with a silver mirror of dreams. I can practice a spiritual city and avoid madness by not hating. I no longer think that the only sane thing in life that makes any sense is to be insane. There is a deeper truth about me other than what is on the surface of my consciousness, or other than what someone might see. I can't be complacent or mentally lethargic because it seems that there is most always a spiritual gravity pulling downward within me towards a lower realm of descent of thought, feeling, and being. I will pursue a spiritual sanity of being, one of an attempted higher good. I seek to uncover concealed pathways and portals that open up to entryways into higher dimensions of brighter light and color. Just making an attempt not to do, be, or think evilly is a positive action and achievement. It's an inner accomplishment in a way of a higher good and virtue. I try to express what is extraordinarily unique and beautiful from within my inner life, to share and to experience with others. I work at acquiring an inner courage to continue changing my life for the better, to avoid self-inflicted wounds by choosing to be constructive in my behaviors and feelings. I am willing to take a risk to trust in my faith and in my choices. I choose hope over misery. I try to create inner being by aspiring to experience the breath of life as a phenomenon of light and inner beauty. A beginning is to make an attempt, a crystal stream of sunlit thought and inspiration to brighten my day and to cheer. There is within me that which I must find for no one but myself. A beginning can be to make an attempt to question, to seek an inner dimension of light and spirit to come into being. A spontaneous stellar bloom of yellow sunburst to brighten my path and day into cheer. An emerald arc of silver mirrors to spark a golden starlight to illuminate hidden passageways, to perceive heaven's deepest blue within another. My greatest self-discovery, a living soul not damaged or broken beyond repair. And that's all chapter 10. Overbeating Spiritual Sanity and the Rejection of Evil by Bill Neely. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you have a terrific day and night and morning and so on and so forth, forever. Even if you think you're dead or somebody thinks you're dead and you know you're not dead. No, we're not going to go there, I guess, but thanks for listening. Have a great bye.